has been going on for a while now. Um, I mean, one of the distinct things that he's been saying for quite a while now is, for example, that the growth develop was it the develop was it growth development plan, the
Yeah,
2031
yeah, yeah. The national,
national development plan,
yeah,
yeah, the 20
NDP.
NDP. He's been saying repeatedly, it's not a plan. That's why nothing is happening.
Yeah, yeah.
This is the a broad vision, and you need to have plans in place for it to happen. And he's been saying that for quite a while now, and that kind of came through as well in what he was saying here.
Yeah.
That the problem is that the government does not have plans, for all these different components that he was talking about. It was interesting though that and the other thing is that it was look, I took it this way.
Yeah,
He's not necessarily divorcing himself from the
for
whole
sure.
thing, but he was saying we must be honest with ourselves. A few years ago, he said this in a different context, where he says there was a time when all of them were invited to communist China, and it was sort of an anti-corruption conference. And they were all amazed to find that it was the Communist Party in China that started by talking about their corruption within their ranks themselves, and yet no one from our side was able to do that kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah.
And perhaps for him, that was kind of thing where he kept, look, we're not honest with ourselves enough. I'm hoping I'm reading him right, that he's not necessarily divorcing himself from it. And he's going to say, as long as I am part of the ANC, I'm going to say, we're not going to make it as long as this is like this, as long as this is like that. And then, of course, one of the big things is that he was saying, you create a vacuum, there are no vacuums, someone will take up the space. So a large part of his observations was how much public society, private sector and civic organizations are moving into spaces that government ought to be in control of or to be providing services in, which, and a lot of it is just true. It's self-evident. We see it.
Yeah. And funny, I mean, there was and he was quoting some of the there's a professor apparently that delivered a speech in the US that he quoted, saying that very same thing, that that kind of causes a different kind of problem, where you have private sector getting into spaces where actually the government should be delivering on, and what you would then find in the long run, you might find that private sector or civil organizations have more power than government as far as the people are concerned, which is a problem. That this vacuum you are talking about, Hector, that vacuum, in a way, where the government is not doing something, people are going to be doing something for themselves, and that is much more harder to control because it's not channeled within the proper channels of government.
That's part of it. I think in that context is where you spoke about this 2007 publication, this book. I think I'm trying to look for the title.
Oh yeah,
the Shock Doctrine: The Rise of Disaster Capitalism. Where he says, look, the whole thing, if I understood it well, of disaster capitalism, is that if you're operating in situations of instability, it gives the excuse to make policies that are not sound, because you're saying we're dealing with a disaster.
Yeah, sure.
And we've seen these moments, because remember, he starts his speech by quoting somebody who says, I can't remember who it is now, who says, if we look at South Africa's history in the last 80 or 100 years, it's been marked more by instability than stability.
Yeah. This journalist,
more of the time, more of the time, and disaster or unstable times create particular kinds of approaches to economics, as it were, which is why it's so important to talk about the so-called disaster capitalism, because I mean, just if you look at incidences, whether it's COVID or even like Mandela's funeral.
I mean, even the KZN and the floods in KZN.
Disaster, that sort of thing. So in some ways, you might even want to read into it that sometimes governments are not so keen to cure the instability because when you got stability, there aren't enough opportunities for graft, for arbitrage, for that sort of
to
thing.
plunder for your own sort of.
Yes, and in the face of disaster, you can always appeal to the emotion rather than to reason.
Yeah.
You're talking about this, and people are dying. And then people will say, "Yeah, really? You're talking about money being. What is money when people are dying, or things like that? And so almost you have a sense of is the unstable situation being allowed to carry on, or maybe even being orchestrated in some instances. Who knows? I mean, a lot has been said about the Eskom debacle, for example. There are sectors that have been saying it's what the picture we see is not the real picture. That sort of thing. So
it's been made to actually to perpetuate at other people's ends, for their own means.
It leaves you thinking. Actually, in an interview that he had on the sidelines of the United Nations 78th conference, I think I was being interviewed by Sherwin Bryce Pease.
Sherwin.
And at some point, he spoke about the challenges of Eskom, having emanated from maybe as far back as 2007 and so on. One of the things he said was, look, part of what happened there was a sort of drive to have more BE players doing business with Eskom. But part of it was to say maybe a contract that would have been given to a single entity is split amongst 21 BE players.
I remember hearing.
And yet you don't quite have the capacity to be able to deal with 21 different service providers with different, competencies and all that sort of thing. So on the face of it looks good because you're opening up broad-based economic empowerment, but then you start having those issues. And I think it's the same thing with, remember South Africa, for a very long time, the economy was firmly in the hands of government. Telecoms through Telkom, Transnet, transport, Transnet, and so on. But then that has changed quite a bit, which is a bit strange because when Mandela was released, one of the things that was very clear in his speech was almost like a move towards even greater state involvement through some form of nationalization.
Yeah, sure.
But now, which is why it's curious that things have gone almost like the complete opposite end.
But remember, look, I mean, the one person who pushed the sort of denationalization of some of these was Thabo Mbeki.
Oh yeah.
So when Thabo Mbeki came in, his approach to economics was actually moving away from nationalizing and trying to put things in private hands, which of course, I mean, and we remember this. There was a lot of different documents that had come before that. I think Thabo Mbeki's document, I forget what it was called.
The gear one.
The gear one, that policy, the gear policy.
There was gear, there was a GISA.
Yeah.
Whatever.
But that was the one that also had a lot of fight with the, with the unions, the likes of Zwelinzima Vavi and so forth. So, but true to what you were saying in terms of also the management of these things under the guise of being a problematic environment. We've seen that also with COVID, where the problematic environment is actually grounds that are nice grounds for these guys to be able to shift monies to various sort of environments. But I think also then the question still then remains in the bigger scheme of things, that what Mbeki is asking of the ANC to actually find its way and sort of regroup and move in this sort of way that he thinks that the ANC should be moving in terms of fixing the economy and fixing the country, as it were. Do you think that his frustration is not just partly on the ANC, but is also on the president?
Well, I suppose being the person and entity in charge, it comes down to that. I mean, he's been talking also very, very vocally about kind of a leadership crisis or even lack of leadership. But now he's been saying that for a while. I mean, when I was looking at this, I thought even as far back as, was it 2012 or so, when he made a speech at an OR Tambo lecture where he was saying, you know, he feels like the country is on a costly national drift, which basically means it's leaderless, rudderless, you know, and can't predict what tomorrow holds for the country, you know. So I think it does come out clear that there's a leadership crisis. But it could be that, you know, styles of leadership vary a lot. So I think of the current president is almost always styled as a master negotiator.
Yeah.
you know.
He's consensus guy.
Mbeki was labeled as the so-called philosopher king kind of thing. So aloof, that sort of thing. You know. So it's not surprising that perhaps if the characterizations have got any truth to it, that Mbeki would feel like Ramaphosa is not giving leadership.
You
know. I think ARK is don't be always seeking consensus all the time.
That's a problem with the president, actually, because
so you don't quite know. But I mean, a lot of things. Sometimes it works, including all these things, and up to maybe you could even say the impeachment of Mkhwebane, that slowly sort of, if you like, I don't know that to call them detractors.
And also maybe the firing of also Ace Magashule.
Who thought that would actually get him out?
Yes,
you know?
no, true.
True. Some people would have said, you would have thought, no, he's not a typical strong man. Was he going to be able to deal with this guy? But he did, you know. Or they did under his leadership, you know.
But for me, that then remains a kind of a big problem in terms of the turnaround, because we know that in an environment, and most of the criticism that, I don't know if you've followed up, guys, the criticism around Ramaphosa actually not also giving interviews, you know, and not allowing his decisions to be questioned by the media and all of course, and all of that. And those are the things that actually make people think that there is this vacuum in terms of leadership, where he has not been at most times being to be able to meet things head on as and when they happen. He would be quiet for a very long time. And I mean, there are lots of examples. The SABC board, that took quite a long time for him to replace. Even now, the issue with you know, the one issue that the Zondo Commission, nothing is happening in that space at the moment, and a lot of people are frustrated.
People keep saying now there was a commission that cost the fiscus almost $1 billion rand, and what's coming of it?
The NPA is quiet, you know. So I mean, those are some of the things that kind of I think the questions around the president. Do you think those questions are justified?
But you know, in a different sort of way, those things were labeled or were also labeled against Mbeki. And I think at some point you were saying, I don't have to speak about everything. There's a minister of health to talk about that. Don't say the president. We want to hear the president. You know, I have my job. They have their job almost, you know. But Mbeki, I suppose, I actually started thinking about that weekly column of his. You kind of knew where he was. And so on. I think considering how things rapidly move in society today, having the sort of negotiator, consensus-seeking kind of leadership might be very costly in that regard. But it's balancing a lot of things, because you also want the center to remain intact. Because look at where Mbeki's style got him. So much dissatisfaction within, and that his own started saying he's got dictatorial tendencies, and eventually asked him to leave. You know, although you're probably right that there are some people who were almost at the verge of saying this current president must also leave because he's not doing the
Serving.
other thing. So,
Mm.
so, and then, of course, I think perhaps one of the things that actually stopped them was to say, no, this is going to be a disaster for us. We're chasing out our own all the time because
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
Mbeki, they took him out, then Zuma, they took him out.
yeah.
Now we can't take this one out as well.
Again.
I mean, you know.
But we don't know. I mean, there's an election that's coming, the ANC election.
Yeah,
that's coming
but
in 4
at
years'
least
time.
maybe they
Would have had a second term. He might not finish his second term.
We don't know. That's still,
Yeah.
yeah, we still need to
Yeah. Okay, guys. I
that
mean,
one.
we've run out of time. The time is 3:59 now. We got a Rise Mzansi interview coming up, and that's what we're going to prepare for. So we will still, after the Rise Mzansi, we'll maybe just close on a lot of other discussions after that. In the meantime, let's prepare for the Rise Mzansi by giving you guys one song just to welcome the Rise Mzansi guest, John B. Pretty Girl.